Some high-profile cases in Minnesota include organizations and programs such as Feeding Our Future, early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention, housing stabilization services, and integrated community supports. Now we're going to watch a video.
You're about to watch Andy Biggs walk into that hearing with a flamethrower made of facts. Not opinions. Not vibes. Facts. $9 billion in fraudulent claims. Fake daycare centers with no kids. Programs meant for low-income children, autistic kids, and the disabled turned into a taxpayer ATM machine that never runs out of cash. And the moment those numbers hit the room, Jamie Raskin doesn't reach for accountability. He reaches for the emergency orange man bad lever like it's behind glass that says break in case of political disaster. Suddenly we're talking about Trump's court cases in New York. Really? That's the defense? That's like your house being robbed and someone saying, yeah, but what about that parking ticket you got in 2017? Biggs is laying out indictments, convictions, 1,700 plus subpoenas, real receipts, real prosecutions. Raskin's trying to redirect traffic like a GPS that refuses to acknowledge the bridge is out. That wasn't oversight. That was a full-blown distraction campaign. Don't look at the empty daycare centers collecting checks. Look over here at this shiny headline. And then that video starts playing. Empty buildings. Doors slamming. No kids. No activity. Just silence and taxpayer money flowing like nothing happened. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. Because when the footage starts talking, the spin starts sweating. This isn't red versus blue. This is about whether billions meant for vulnerable Americans got siphoned off while officials conveniently missed it. And Biggs didn't come to play nice. He came to expose it. If you're already fired up, hit like, subscribe, and buckle up. Let's watch the full clip before I give you the full breakdown.
The fraud in Minnesota was discovered not by a right-wing social media influencer who's been harassing people in communities all over Minnesota in recent weeks, but by the hard work of real local investigative journalists, brave whistleblowers, and state and federal auditors. It is this fraud, which we must take seriously, is not unlike the $2.5 billion breathtaking Medicare fraud scheme uncovered last year in the home state of the chairman of this subcommittee, as he himself mentioned, or the massive COVID-19 unemployment assistance fraud scheme uncovered in Chairman Jordan's home state of Ohio. Even our president has been convicted of 34 counts of criminal fraud by a jury of his peers in New York related to the fraudulent payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels, and also civilly convicted in New York for different kinds of real estate fraud. Fraud is not headquartered in one state or one municipality, much less one ethnic, racial, or religious community. But President Trump couldn't resist the temptation to use fraud in Minnesota as an occasion to mobilize the power of the federal government to bully and intimidate first and second generation Somali Americans who live in that state.
Minnesota has lost billions of dollars in state-administered and federally funded programs due to organized fraud. Fraud networks operating in Minnesota dating back more than a decade have submitted over $9 billion, that's a billion with B, in false claims. Some high-profile cases in Minnesota include organizations and programs such as Feeding Our Future, early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention, housing stabilization services, and integrated community supports. Now we're going to watch a video.
It's welfare fraud. It's all about the daycare.
They estimate as much as $100 million a year is being stolen by shady daycare center operators.
So how much money are we talking about stolen from the American taxpayer?
Well in excess of $1 billion.
Ripping off state-run programs intended to feed low-income kids, house the disabled, and provide services to autistic children.
Where are the children at? Do you know where the children are at? Where are the children at in these daycare centers?
I don't care.
Are there children here today?
No.
No children?
Yes.
So this is Quality Leering Center. Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going.
Attorney General Keith Ellison was focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was keeping these folks in business.
When do you think Governor Walz knew about this fraud?
From the very beginning.
What happened here in Minnesota that allowed this fraud to materialize?
The people at the highest levels of responsibility in the government of the state of Minnesota looked the other way.
Since 2021, the DOJ has charged 98 defendants in Minnesota-based fraud cases, 85 of whom are of Somali descent. Of the 98 defendants, 64 have been convicted. DOJ has now undertaken extensive investigative action, which includes issuing over 1,750 subpoenas, executing more than 130 search warrants, and conducting more than 1,000 witness interviews. Since the start of the Trump administration, the federal response to fraud in Minnesota has intensified following a series of high-profile cases involving state-administered, federally funded programs. One of the initial instances of high-profile fraud in the state involved the nonprofit Feeding Our Future, which was at the center of a $250 million COVID-19-related fraud scheme. As part of the scheme, fraudsters exploited Department of Agriculture, USDA food programs designed to provide meals for children. Federal prosecutors ultimately convicted 57 defendants and described the scheme as the nation's largest COVID-era fraud. The issue gained renewed national attention in late December 2025 following a widely shared YouTube video posted by one of our witnesses, Mr. Nick Shirley. Mr. Shirley's work highlighted suspected fraud in Minnesota child care programs. His reporting prompted federal authorities to intensify investigations, expand oversight, and coordinate multi-agency enforcement efforts. A week ago today, Mr. Shirley released a second video that documented alleged fraud in the transportation industry intended to provide rides for children, the disabled, and the elderly. Mr. Shirley uncovered companies with questionable addresses and vehicles intended to transport children, the disabled, and the elderly that remained idle for extended periods of time. We look forward to hearing from Mr. Shirley about what he was able to uncover. But how did we get here? Hopefully another witness, Scott Dexter, a former fraud investigator for the Minnesota Department of Human Services, can shed some light on that for us. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this massive wave of fraudulent activity didn't just have the consequence of ripping off taxpayers. It has drastically impacted legitimate organizations that are truly helping their neighbors.
Now that you've seen the whole thing, let's stop pretending this was complicated. Andy Biggs came in with facts, numbers, indictments, convictions, subpoenas, real data. Jamie Raskin came in with a smoke machine and a script that says change the subject immediately. $9 billion in fraudulent claims over a decade. Nearly 100 defendants charged. Dozens already convicted. This isn't a rumor on social media. This is federal prosecution. And what does Raskin do when faced with that? He pivots to Trump's court cases in New York like that somehow feeds a single hungry child in Minnesota. That's not oversight. That's political theater. When you can't defend the fraud, you distract from the fraud. It's the oldest trick in the book. Look over there. Meanwhile, the money meant for low-income kids, autistic children, and the disabled is vanishing into shell companies and empty daycare centers with no kids in sight. The most telling moment wasn't even what Raskin said. It was what he didn't say. No outrage over the billions lost. No fire about the taxpayers getting fleeced. Just carefully crafted outrage about tone and optics. Because if they admit the system failed on their watch, the whole narrative collapses. You can't claim to be champions of the vulnerable while billions meant for the vulnerable disappear into luxury cars and fake addresses. And let's talk about the influencer angle. Raskin tried to downplay it, but the reality is brutal. A guy with a camera exposed more in weeks than layers of bureaucracy did in years. That's embarrassing. The door slamming, the evasive answers, the empty facilities, that wasn't a smear campaign. That was visual proof. You can't spin footage of buildings with no children inside collecting taxpayer money. Biggs didn't need theatrics. He had numbers. He had convictions. He had timelines. While the left obsesses over lawfare and political vendettas, the American taxpayer is getting robbed blind. This wasn't Biggs attacking a community. It was Biggs defending taxpayers. And the reason Raskin looked rattled is simple. You can't what about your way out of $1 billion fraud scandal. Biggs brought accountability. Raskin brought excuses. And America saw the difference.